Hello everybody. I'd like to talk a little bit about Chapter 1 and some of the ideas that you cover in this chapter. Historically, U.S. sociologists have viewed social problems in terms of a social pathology. Bad people were assumed to be the sources of social problems because they disturbed some prevailing order in society. This was the case for most of the first third of the 20th century. In the 1930s, however, sociologists began to focus on the conditions of society, rapid changes, urbanization, industrialization, as a source of social problems. While some people focus on problem individuals, our focus here is going to be not on individual pathologies as disruptive of a social order, but on something we call system blame. The person blame approach in social problem study assumes that the social sources of social problems are, well, basically they're just the behaviors of bad people or deviants. The problem with this, though, is that when we engage this sort of a perspective, we ignore or rule out any social causes for the problems that may occur. I can give you a couple of examples. First of all, if we look at the problem of obesity in America, which is a prevailing problem, it's easy to go, well, you need to push back from the table, stop eating so much, get some exercise. We immediately go to an individual blame. This isn't to say that individuals are not responsible for their actions. However, there are many elements that come into a thoroughgoing analysis of the problem of obesity that need to be taken into consideration beyond individual control. Genetics, for example. Moreover, there are structural elements, and we talk about social structure a lot, large-scale patterns of behavior, human behavior, that come into play that contribute to obesity as well. The lack of gym class in elementary school or recess, the demand that people more and more lead sedentary lifestyles. There's a high correlation with obesity and poverty, which may at first seem counterintuitive. However, if we look at obesity and poverty, we note that there are elements in impoverished communities that may contribute to obesity, the most prevailing of which is the lack of access to healthy food, or grocery stores that serve produce, fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, fresh meats, raw foods, the sorts of foods that contribute to a healthier lifestyle are not available. We actually, epidemiologists and social epidemiologists and people that study this actually have a term for this. The term is food desert. So if we look at a system blame approach, it takes all of these things into consideration. Basically, our focus in this class is going to be on society rather than just problem individuals. A guiding assumption of our inquiry here is that norm violations and violators are symptoms of larger social problems. That deviants are, for the most part, not to be blamed entirely for their deviance. We need to also look at the system in which they deviate. Again, this is not to rule out any possibility of individual agency, individual culpability for wrongdoing, but to put it in a larger perspective, primarily because looking at the system or the whole society is given short shrift in our society, in our analysis, in our intellectual discourse on problems. So we have to look at the larger picture. That's what we'll be doing in this class. We'll use a variety of approaches, and we'll draw on a number of sets of data that have been gathered through different approaches to social research, perhaps that you should know about. We can do a participant observation. We can do a survey. We can do secondary data analysis. Often data is collected by the government, by private industry, on a comprehensive level that gives us a real clear picture to social problems and social issues as they go on. The second point I'd like to make in this little introduction to Chapter 1, or this little discussion of Chapter 1, is on what C. Wright Mills calls the sociological imagination. C. Wright Mills was a very important mid-20th century sociologist who was the first sociologist to call into question the idea of person blaming, of pathologies merely being a bunch of bad people in the system. He looked at two issues that define a social problem that you need to be aware of. We can have personal troubles, what he called private issues. For example, if you were obese in 1940s, the amount of obesity was not, the rates of obesity were not nearly as high as they were today. So that might be a private issue. When a problem reaches a sort of critical mass, it becomes a public issue, a personal, it's a social problem, what he called a public problem. Okay, there are a number of things you can think of that may fit this description. A number of patterns. Sexual harassment, not really a large-scale problem before women entered the workforce in gender-integrated work situations with men. Certainly there were incidents of it, but until it reached a sort of critical mass, where there were a lot of women who were experiencing sexual harassment, it did not become a public issue. We also want to keep in mind that no social problem applies to everyone in society. It's usually some subgroup, well, it's always some subgroup of people for whom the problem applies. Women versus men, people with obesity versus people who don't have a problem with it. So it's always some subcategory, and oftentimes the solution to a social problem causes another social problem. So keep these things in mind as you read through the material for Chapter 1, and you'll do just fine. Thank you very much.